One of my happiest memories is when my parents would, from time to time, go away. They would, I don't mean that as badly as it sounds, but would go away on trips or go and visit family or whatever. And, we'd have a babysitter or whatever. And it was cool because, you'd want someone who would let you stay up as long as you like, eat whatever you want, watch whatever you wanted on television. No streaming back then, kids. And I always really enjoyed that. So the idea of not having any rules and being able to make them up as I went along was really, really intriguing. And if you're a kid, it was something I really, really wanted to do. So today I'm going to talk about what happens when you don't have a dojo to train at and you don't have someone telling you what to eat or how to train or what time to go to bed or to stop scratching that because it'll never heal. Kia ora, I'm Tuari Dawson and you're listening to the Invisible Sensei podcast. A huge deal in my family when we were kids was the American fast food, Kentucky Fried Chicken, or as it's now known, KFC. And to be honest, the price of it for my family meant that it was something which happened, but rarely. And usually when there'd been some kind of financial windfall that allowed my parents, to afford it. It was quite costly, and it's still quite costly to be totally honest. But anyway, the times when we had it were kind of like this a massive sort of celebration amongst myself and my siblings. It was just hugely sought after. We saw all the commercials on television, which, when you look at something on television, always made it look delicious. And whenever we had it, there was never enough to go around. It always felt like we were kind of fighting each other for the next piece. And, it was so delicious to us. And it was such a treat that I always felt the injustice of not having as much of it as I wanted. And so when I was a kid, I promised myself when I was an adult, I would eat KFC for breakfast, lunch, and tea, or as people say in other countries, dinner. And no one would stop me. That's all I would do. And I would eat whatever I wanted, and I'd do whatever I wanted because there was no one there to restrict me. Of course, the billionaire lifestyle has not yet eventuated, and now that I'm in my 50s, eating KFC for breakfast, lunch and dinner is not such a great thing. The point for bringing this up, I guess, is that when we were young, there were certain prohibitions against eating fast food. Health was not amongst them, to be totally honest. It was thought of as such a rare treat that it wasn't really that much of an issue. We didn't know anyone who ate KFC a lot. And I think that because it was such a rare delicacy to us and because of our financial situation, we didn't have it very often, that it seemed like the most attractive thing in the world to have that. I guess it wasn't the KFC, it was the freedom to choose to eat or to do anything that I wanted when I got free of my parents and my grandparents and all the people that were trying to control me, man. And now, I think I don't actually like KFC that much. I mean, I have it on occasion, let's be honest about that, and I do like the burgers. No, I'm not sponsored by KFC. But my point being is that a friend of mine asked me a while ago, well, actually not too long ago, actually yesterday, about what to do when the dojo that you're at is closing. And it was funny because the first thing that came to my mind was the freedom that entails. And then, of course, backtracking into that, I thought about what it was like when I was a kid. And what I thought this thing called freedom was actually going to entail, and didn't end up entailing that at all. So I have talked a little bit about my martial arts background And also, if you listen to the podcast, you realise that I'm not affiliated to any large organisations. I have been in the past, but I choose not to be now because, to be totally honest, I'm such an enlightened being and I'm such a master. I no longer require these mortal constraints. Yes, no, that's not the truth, obviously. I found for me that where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do generally was, well, shall we say, the path less trodden. And I also kind of got sick, as we all do, of the implicit political bullshit that entails being part of these huge organisations, or organisations in general. There's always, you know what I'm talking about. If you've done any martial art for any period of time, it generally comes down to politics. It can be cultural, it can be personal, it can be a whole bunch of different things. He said, she says, or it can be something actually quite destructive, and it can be something quite valid as well. So it is just what it is. So for me, I got to a point where I had hoped that that would no longer be a part of the equation. So what I've chosen to do, I guess in the last, 20 years maybe even longer than that, is just to pursue the training, pursue the art. And so I've talked a little bit about the negatives of that, and I thought what I might do is talk about what my attitude towards it has been and some of the things that I've learned on the positive as well. And so, in answer to my friend's query, I think that, just to give you some context, so the dojo that he is at is closing its doors. Now, he is what I would call an advanced practitioner and been in the game for some decades and has great technique and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose it's not about going out and starting your own organisation or style. It certainly wasn't that for me. But if you're used to a certain way of training, then it can be a little bit daunting. I think we all need to have those experiences where we're able to sort of create our own approach. Now, I should say that my belief is that in the formative years of our training, it's really important to be going to a dojo which, one, is taught by competent instructors. And when I talk about competency, I'm not talking just in terms of lineage, although lineage does not always guarantee quality. It can be an indicator of it as well. But the quality of the people that you're learning from, that's a huge part. In those formative years, it's really important to get the fundamentals, the kihon, in whatever martial art you're doing, and get to a place where those form the core of your training. Now, we all go in the big circle, and the big circle is, of course, the idea that we want to be, I'll talk for me, where I want to look cool doing the thing that I love. I want to do the high kicks, and I want to do the spinning hook kicks, and I want to do all that kind of flashy stuff and use the cool weapons and do the cool techniques and all that kind of razzmatazz. And that can often mean that, I'm not focusing on, I wasn't focusing on the kihon as much as I should have. And so I think in those formative years, it's really important to have a strong base. Now, if you'd spoken to me about this 30 years ago, I would have laughed in your face because I was so entrenched in wanting to do things that looked cool and felt cool. As I've said, I wasn't a big fan of fundamentals, but as I've gotten older and supposedly a little wiser, I've started to see that that really is what informs most of my training. In fact, when I go to other dojo or other schools, what I'm looking at is not the flash and dash. What I'm looking at is good fundamental technique. And I think that those things create habits, and I think that they create an outlook and build a really strong base to not only practice the style that they're doing, that you're pursuing, but also at certain points when your base is strong enough to start to bring in other concepts and even other martial arts at certain levels. So for me, when I decided not to go out on my own, that sounds so grand, I spent most of my life quite transient. I moved around a great deal. I lived in lots of different countries. Sometimes I was living in places where there were no dojo, or at least no access to ongoing training. So there were periods of 2 or 3 years where I had no formal instruction, and I would have to kind of figure it out myself. And one of the things about coming up in a dojo that had a very strong emphasis on Hojo Undo was that I was able to kind of fashion things, and I'm quite creative as a person, sometimes a little bit too creative, to fashion things that I could train with, makiwara and all those sorts of things, and there's always stones to lift and, all those kinds of things I'm sure you can imagine. And so I kind of got used to, at certain periods in my life, just doing my own thing, creating a habit and practicing it. Now, there were certainly were points in that journey when I think what I did was solidified mistakes and poor habits in terms of my technique. And then when I got with people who were, more advanced than me and senior to me, then I had to unlearn and try and undo what I'd been practicing. But you get the point. The idea in that instance, because I was traveling, was to continue to train, was continue to practice. It's easier in some ways for me to reframe and redefine what I'm doing rather than try and start from scratch. And certainly there were times when I wanted to give up training. It would have been easier to do so, and I would go through burnouts, and I would go through injuries and all those things which accompany our pursuit of these things. And also too, it's a lonely, I've said this so many times, it's a lonely pursuit martial arts can be. And there will come times when there's no one to train with, where you have limited space, where you don't have access to facilities, and that's why it's really important to, think about where and how you want to train. I'll give you an example. So I was living and working in Papua New Guinea, and I was there for a year, and I was really lucky in that I was given an apartment in a compound, and it was quite a spacious apartment by the measure of Papua New Guinea. Had beautiful hardwood floors, and one of the first things I did was I removed a lot of the furniture, so I'd have somewhere to train. Now, it was probably about 6 feet across by about 4 feet wide, but it was enough that I had space to train. Also underneath there was, because the house was on stilts, there was a small area downstairs where I could train, and there was a palm tree that I could hit. And no, I'm not thinking in terms of, kickboxer, screaming at palm trees and, knocking them down, but I'm just meaning that I could strap a pad around it and use it as a makiwara. Now, for me, I got used to training in that way, and I guess at that time it was really about maintenance. In terms of not having regular input into my technique, I think what I've tried to do is cultivate friendships and relationships with people who are senior to me, that are colleagues, that are walking a similar path. And I seek conversations around technique and training practices and all those sorts of things. Now, I'm primarily a karate practitioner, and yes, I practice kobudo, and I've done other martial arts and I practice other things, but primarily karate. So the way in which I approach training means that I get to sort of tailor it to my own specifications. I get to do what makes me most effective, and I know that sounds really cool, and sometimes it can be just bloody boring, to be totally honest. And also too, sometimes, you crave a little bit of contact with other people to just get a sense of whether or not you're moving in the right direction. So I think creating a community, but in essence, I think keeping a daily practice is really important. Now, what does a daily practice look like if you're not part of a large organization or attending an ongoing dojo? Well, for me, if you've spent time with me, you know that I'm a little bit of a fanatic about this stuff. So it can be getting books. I mean, there's obviously YouTube and social media and all those sorts of things, but it can be having conversations. I'm really lucky in that by doing this podcast, it's actually created some wonderful friendships with some really senior practitioners. And I'm not going to drop names, but I'm very grateful to have their input. It's also led to me training in lots of different countries, having the privilege of teaching in lots of different countries, but also being fed on an ongoing basis. So I think it's really important to create the community that we want to be a part of. And that's not always an easy thing. And people have lives, and there's logistics and family and commitments and life changes and all those sorts of things. But I think it's really important to try to create the community that you'd like to be a part of. And goodly and badly, you get to do things because they make sense to you. One thing that I've kind of shied away from, well, I don't know if I've shied away from it, but I guess it's sort of how I've been feeling of late in the last couple of years. I've started to concentrate more on how a martial art feels in my body. Like I was talking to some good friends the other day, and I was talking about, for me, I do a lot of core training, I do a lot of stretching, and I do some strength work. I like to lift weights, although, the last, 12 months I had a heart attack. About, I went 4 or 5 months ago. So that's somewhat changed my relationship with weight training. But it hasn't changed my relationship to resistance training. I've just been more mindful of how I do that. So what it is that I get to figure out how it feels. I focus on how it feels as opposed to how it looks. And of course, I want to look cool. I want to have cool karate, and I want to have cool kobudo, and I want to be able to do the cool moves and grappling and all that sort of stuff. But I guess where I'm at is I'm focusing more on how I feel in my body. And I'm not talking about always when I'm doing karate, how I'm walking around the house, how I get up from the sofa after watching Netflix, and falling asleep in front of the TV. Am I sort of doing that thing where I grunt as I stand up and everything in my body is cracking? Or am I able to stand up reasonably smoothly? And for young people who may be listening, that may sound like a ridiculous thing, but it's things like running to grab a train, or being able to go for a walk without pain, or, let alone the combat aspect of it. I think for me, I view my training outside of an organization and outside of a dojo is that I kind of carry the dojo with me. And that can be a good or a bad thing. And I'm going to focus on the good thing. So I get to train in a way that makes sense to my timetable. I do teach seminars and things like that, but mainly I have a group of students that I've chosen to train, and my students, there's only 5 of them, and they're kids ranging from probably about between ages 11 to 13, and I have a couple of colleagues who are Udanchu who we train with on a sort of semi-regular basis. Certainly there's a lot of input. If we're not training together, we have conversations or exchange things in chat as one does. But I think it's also really important to make your training interesting to yourself. I think that probably, I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, and I know it's a popular thing to do, but I think probably where my focus has always been, it seems very, shall we say, ADHD-ish. And so I utilize music. I have different ways of training. I utilize kettlebells and steel maces, and I will actively watch how other people train and sort of glean ideas and sort of chop and change and do some things and let other things go. I try to make my training something which I go to as a habit. And part of forming a habit is creating, for me at least, things which trigger a state change. Now, it may be quite scary in the sense that you've got all this sort of freedom. And there's this whole thing around, having discipline and those sorts of things. But I think you have to make your training realistic. Realistic in the sense, I'm not talking about in terms of effectiveness. That is always, that's always a super important thing. But effective in terms of the time you have, the location, the weather, your physical health, what's going on in your family. As I get older, I realise that what I get out of martial arts is the energy, the vitality, I guess, and the focus is so that when I'm doing things with my family, with my loved ones, I'm doing it in a way which allows me to be present and focused and of real benefit. And there are going to be times when you're doing the solo thing, you may go to another dojo. You may end up going to another dojo. You may end up finding the sensei of your dreams and the practitioners of your dreams, or you may not. So an important thing to, I guess, focus on is what is it that you want. And for me, in terms of gradings and all those sorts of things, those have obviously done externally. And to be totally honest, like I'm coming up to doing my 7th dan, and I'm doing my 7th dan in the next couple of months, and I'm nervous about it. I want to do I want to have a good showing. I want to do, justice to my teachers and to my community, and I'm happy with just not looking ridiculous. As ridiculous as a 54-year-old man walking around, it was unridiculous as a 54-year-old man walking around in canvas pajamas can be, I guess, swinging weapons and fighting people and whatnot. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I need a goal to work towards. As I say, it's a personal thing. I mean, if I'm lucky enough to be successful, the certificate will hang on the wall, probably in my bedroom or in my wardrobe or wherever, but it won't change my day-to-day. It won't change paying bills, going to work, mowing the lawn, doing the washing, all those sorts of things. But what it does is it gives me something to work towards. And I think it's important. I found that it's important to have things to look forward to in your training, as in life. Doing your own thing also allows you to put things into a better perspective, I think a larger perspective. And by that I mean you're able to do what life demands in terms of priorities. And if you work it right, you're able to create the kind of martial arts that you never learned. So in my case, I'm trying to practice the martial arts in a way that I never did. I was never taught to. I want to do it in a way which suits my age, my fitness level, my lifestyle, my work commitments, my family commitments, and all those sorts of things. Oftentimes, I know, just like everyone else, you're going to the dojo, and if it's not a professional dojo, if you're not, if people are not lucky enough to have their own space, you're going to a scout hall, or you're going to some, sports pavilion, and there's people playing basketball and whatnot all around you, and it's not very, shall we say, classically dojo-esque. But likewise, sometimes I take my ball and a kettlebell, and I'll find a rugby field somewhere at the back of nowhere, and I'll go out there, put my headset on, and just practice for an hour. Something I also use is timers. I find that, and I may have spoken about this before, so if I have, forgive me, having a timer. So let's say I want to go out and I want to go and lift weights or something. So what I'll do is I'll set a timer, and I'll go, so let's say, into 20-minute segments. And I'll go, right, I'm going to have my timer where I can see it, and it's going to count down for 20 minutes. Now, if I can hit 20 minutes and I've achieved something, usually I'll hit 20 minutes, and if there's more in the tank, I'll keep going. So either way, I've hit a target or I've exceeded one. And that kind of creates a win-win, at least in my own brain. And you can also, you can also customize how you approach your training in terms of intensity. So I've noticed at my age, there's probably beginning of the week and the end of the week where I can have really knockdown, drag out sessions. Well, for me, where I can do things like sparring and all those kind of things. I found that it's counter to my physical health if I'm trying to do that every day. I just don't have it. I don't have it in my back, my hips, my shoulders. I don't have that sort of level of energy anymore, so I have to be very economic with the way that I do these things. But that doesn't stop me from training in some way every day. And that's kind of the fun thing. I think I'm looking at trying to create a community of people who are senior to me but are colleagues, people who are walking the same path but are colleagues. And you've heard me say it before, I'm not looking for a father figure. I'm not looking for cultural identity. I'm not looking for the meaning of my life through martial arts. I'm lucky enough that I come from a culture and a language and a background that's its own thing, that's its own life. So I'm not looking for those things. What I am looking for is to enjoy the martial arts that I practice, continue to do them in a healthy way, learn more, challenge myself, but also treat myself like a friend as opposed to an enemy. In the last podcast I talked about that alpha male brain and the idea about domination and, rise and grind and all those sorts of things. I am personally depressed when I see that stuff come up on Instagram, these 20-year-old muscle men or at any age getting up and talking about, do this and do that. And there's always contrary messages. The thing I would say, bro, is that do what challenges you, but do what your critical analysis and common sense tells you to or indicates is the best path. And also realize that the way that you do it, the way that I do it, is not for everyone. I'm sure that people would watch me practicing and training or do one of my warm-ups and go, what is this guy up to? And in fact, I did a seminar 2 years ago and someone took a live of it and put it on social media, and we were doing warm-ups using chairs. And to be totally honest, people came back and said, what is this shit? And it was only a couple of minutes of just doing chair drills. I like to use the chair as an opening and a warm, and some of the stuff that I do, not every time, but I've found it personally in my training. But people just absolutely roasted me over it. People really got at me about using a chair, and this isn't karate, and this isn't this, and this isn't that, and what's the point of this, and it looks like ballet dancing and all that sort of stuff. And I'm going, yeah, I wasn't the one who posted it, but I definitely paid the price. So another point is that realize that if you're going to be spending time without, I guess, the umbrella of an organization or a dojo, a formal dojo, then you have to make really clear decisions about where you want to go, what you want to do, and how you want to do it. And one of the things which I think is really good advice is one of my sensei said to me early on, we have a dojo kun, and the first of which is be humble and polite. So that's a huge thing. Humble is knowing what you can do, having some pride in it, but not letting your ego go crazy. But there's also another one, practice earnestly with creativity, which is one of my favorite ones. Try and be earnest in your training, but be creative with it as well. And also there's another part of the dojo kun that says, do not be too proud or too modest. So I spend a lot of time being an enemy to myself and thinking that I was, for want of a better term, a piece of shit, and that no one would want to train with me, and that my focus was outward. So I was always thinking about how people would react rather than trying to dig into what I needed to do in the martial art and how I wanted to develop it in my own body and in my mind and even in my spirit. And once I connected with that and I committed to that, I find that I've found a lot more peace. Now, know this. Not everyone is going to like what you do. Not everyone is going to agree with what you do. And that's okay. That's why you don't read the comments and you don't invite the conversation. But know this, if you ask people for their opinion, they will give it to you. And sometimes it's not always what you want to hear. And if it's from someone that you trust, maybe it's something you need to hear. But failing that, go forth, enjoy your training, look for other dojo or don't. Have a think about why you're doing it, develop your own ideas, and have a thought as to where you want to go, how you want to do it, and how do you enjoy it. Yes, enjoy it. Yes, it should be a challenge. No, it shouldn't be something you hate doing. But it should be something that brings positivity, energy, focus, and clarity in the things in your life that are much more important than running around wearing canvas PJs.